This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
One of the places that fascinated me the most in the hunt for the story is Wyoming. We know nothing about his time in Wyoming, if there even was time in Wyoming. I was recently reading this column by Bill Sniffen, he's a Wyoming columnist, and I don't think there's going to come a point in time where I don't wonder what happened to Amy Jo Bechtel. This is not Israel Keys. Too young, too immature. It would be really hard to make the timing of all that fit. It's suspected that it's Dale Wade Eaton. Like, that's basically the current, I think, person that everybody really thinks about. But here's how the column goes. Back in 2013, Bill Sniffen had been writing about, I think it was Amy Jo at the time was 16 years old, and he'd been writing about this other case for 33 years. And the other case he's talking about, he says, after 33 years of one cold case and 16 years of the other, it's always been easy to believe that some unsolved disappearances will just never be explained. In Lander, for decades, we've pondered about two gals who vanished, Virginia Uden and Amy Bechtel. They both disappeared, and I wrote the news stories about them while I was the Lander newspaper publisher. Amy's still missing, but the horrible fate of Virginia Uden and her two sons has now been known for a while. Ironically, both women worked for me. It seemed odd to be writing these horrible stories about people you actually knew. These two mysteries seemed destined to be perpetually unsolved. Then, just like that, one was solved. Gerald Uden was a worker at the U.S. Steel Iron ore mine at Atlantic City. It's 25 miles outside of Lander in the Wind River Mountains. Co-worker Kim Curtis remembered him as scary. Virginia Beard must have seen something in the guy, since she married him and he adopted her two sons, Reagan, 10, and Richard, 11. Everyone knows what happens next. The story is impossible to ignore, and if you wrote about the Uden family as fiction, the story would not sell because it's so unbelievable. Then there's Amy. Amy Bechtel was 24 when she disappeared after jogging in the Wind River Mountains above Lander on July 24, 1997. Although what happened to her is not known, it's believed she's dead. It's also believed she died at the hands of a serial killer, who authorities believe is already in custody for a similar Wyoming abduction and killing. The suspect is Dale Wade Eaton, the man on death row for the famous and heinous Little Miss killing. Eaton had kidnapped, raped, and murdered another pretty young woman in 1989. Fremont County Detective John Zarago recounted that Eaton's brother told him the convicted killer was in the Lander area at the time of Amy's disappearance. But evidence is lacking, and Eaton is not talking. My wife, Nancy, and I both have positive memories of Amy and Virginia. Amy was a part-time photographer and a damn good one. Virginia did some telemarketing for the newspaper. She had recently divorced Gerald and was desperate for money. Gerald and his new wife, Alice, worked at the U.S. Steel mine. Alice was convicted of killing a previous husband and dumping his body in a mine shaft in Albany County. Then they conspired to rid Gerald of his obligations, his ex-wife Virginia and his two adopted sons. An acquaintance of Alice, who worked with her at the mine, reported on Facebook that Alice was always complaining about Gerald never having any money because he had to support Virginia and the kids. Money appears to be the motive for taking a beau's life 33 years ago. On a fall day in September of 1980, Gerald convinced Virginia and her two boys to meet him in Pavilion, Wyoming for some hunting. He murdered all three. He stashed her car down a deep canyon off the Dickinson Park Road. Officers finally found the body of Alice's previous husband, and that led them to her and Gerald. By then, they were living in Missouri. Meanwhile, Officer Andy Hansen at the Department of Criminal Investigation never gave up and connected the dots. credit also goes to a University of Wyoming archaeologist who, with 8 students, spent some awful summer days in 2008 digging around in an old pigsty in Pavilion looking for evidence of the Uden bodies. They were unsuccessful. Gerald confessed to all 3 murders, although he did try unsuccessfully to recant that confession, and he's spending the rest of his life in prison. His wife, Alice, died in prison a year ago, which would have been 2012. Gerald originally said that he killed Virginia and the 2 boys, and their bodies are at the bottom of Fremont Lake outside of Pinedale. Then he said they were not. Most people around here believe the bodies were dismembered by Alice and fed to the pigs on their farm near Pavilion. And Amy, well, her fate is still a mystery. And again, this is Bill Sniffin's column, Eden Murder Mystery Solved. It's from 2013. Someday we will learn about Amy. So his thinking is that eventually, this other case will be solved. And the truth is, a lot of things are solved in Wyoming. But what I found interesting about trying to connect Israel Keyes to Wyoming is there is absolutely nothing to really connect him besides some of his own words and what the FBI believes went on there. But we think we found 2 victims of Israel Keyes in Wyoming. One was very early and one was later on. It's very complicated to track down Wyoming missing persons cases. And the truth is, Wyoming did a great job solving a lot of their cases. But they had 2 mysteries that come up in our search that are definitely on my list for Israel Keyes victims. The second one was always on my list. The first one was not always on my list, but after hearing what Meg had to say about it, she's on my list. None of the photo comparison search victims are in Wyoming. Let me say that again. None of the photo comparison search victims are in Wyoming. And I always wondered if that's where the found body was going to be, and he knew it. But I also wondered if the photo comparisons, like we wondered all along, do they link back to him at all? Do they have anything to do with him? And at least 2 of them do, because Bill and Lorraine are in there. I wondered if we were going to run into places where he was dealing with some kind of shame, which would mean it had to be really early on, and that was Meg's victims very, very early. Very good reason. Mine is not. Mine's much later, but they're very similar.
We covered Texas and we come back to Texas, but one of the things that always stood out to me, I had trouble understanding where the FBI gets this claim from. They make a claim that Israel Keyes has admitted or alluded to having a cache near Green River, Wyoming. And do you remember this whole conversation in the interviews, or remember what they were talking about?
I've always been a little bit confused about what you're saying about as far as, because I know somewhere when he first committed suicide and they were releasing information to the public in an attempt to solicit information from the public, they talk about a specific period of time they felt like he was probably in Wyoming and he was probably committing crimes.
Right.
I've fought off the urge to go back and listen to these interviews again. So I haven't listened since we did our complete listen. So I'm going off of memory here, but I remember them saying you mean maybe you'll tell us about Wyoming, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So it comes up a couple of times where I looked through my notes. I even made a mistake in my notes because I confused the conversation about Green River thinking they were talking about Eagle River. I actually wrote down, is this Earthquake Park reference? The first time that I did it. The second time through, I caught it, and the third time through, I have not listened to it a lot in preparation for these summer episodes because honestly, I know about pretty much everything Keyes related that I'm going to know at this point as far as those interviews go. And it gets really hard for me to deal with like listening to his nonsense. However, what I did do was I went back through this initial press release, not the one that was released, but it's in the FBI open records request, like the initial open records request before we get like all the FOIA files. It's sort of, it's a strange document because it's actually referencing an FBI agent going to make a presentation on Keys. So it sort of outlines a very similar document to what they released where they said, we think he was here, here, and here. What bothers me about the Wyoming trips is his records for Wyoming are not really in the files. The records that they put in the timeline and the references that they make, if you notice, almost every one of them, his name is not there. It's a redacted name. And the conclusion that you and I came to was his partner did nursing work, and we decided that more than likely these were her records, and they were equating some of the calendar notes and some of like the dark spots on Key's timeline to when she was there and had invoices for her work and other like supply receipts. And they were saying, okay, that's when he would have been in Wyoming.
His girlfriend was a traveling nurse. I have on my, you're right, they don't have it directly linked to Keys, but they do talk about it in a roundabout way. And unless there's additional audio that or video or whatever that hasn't been released, I can't figure out how they get on the topic. But I have it marked on my calendar or my timeline that I have a question mark with Wyoming on September the 2nd, 2007 and July the 3rd, 2008. And that's like and I guess that's when he was in Utah. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So it looks like maybe his travel is him linking up with Kimberly.
Right. And so I was thinking about that this morning, actually. It's interesting. I haven't thought about it. I don't know why. But if you think about, like, we know about the couriers, and he flew into Chicago.
Yeah, he flew into Chicago, and he went down
through Indiana.
to Indiana, right? And then he drove up to his kill kit first.
Right.
And then he went over to the couriers, and then he drove after everything went down with the couriers. He went back through. I'm trying to New York, basically, because that's where the.
When did he go to Maine?
Like on that, you mean related to the couriers? Mm-hmm. Let's take a look. The courier trip is in June of 2011, and the way that goes down is like this. On June 2nd, he takes an Anchorage to Chicago flight, according to the FBI timeline. And then he has a Hertz rental car from June 2nd through June 15th that came out of Illinois. So then on 6/3/2011, they have an Indiana toll road transaction for multiple toll exits. On 6/8/2011, he's in Essex, Vermont, because that's the night that Bill and Lorraine disappear. He has a 6/9/2011 Handy Suites reservation. The next record for him is him leaving on 6/15/2011 out of Chicago, flying to San Francisco.
Okay, and I have a side note on that trip that says indications that place Keys in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, New York, Maine, and Vermont.
Correct.
And I didn't notate those, but so we don't actually know when he was in Maine.
No, so we don't know when he was in Maine. It's assumed that it is after the disappearance of the couriers and before he gets on that flight to San Francisco. So when he flies to San Francisco, he has a Days Inn reservation on 6/15/6/16. That's in San Francisco, California. What's weird is there's then a 6/21 flight that's referenced in the timeline, but without his name. It doesn't have his name on there. That goes from Anchorage to Las Vegas. And then there are a series of transactions that play out up until essentially June 23rd that are in Las Vegas. Our understanding of that is that because the names are redacted, that it's not Keys, but that's sort of attributed to him. Then he comes back onto the timeline, and it's him coming out of like his transactions on the timeline. They don't pick up again until Samantha Koenig is dead. There are 6 transactions on the timeline for September of 2011. Those indicated that someone was staying in Rock Springs in Pinedale, Wyoming. And this is September of 2011. The FBI runs with it, and they say Keys is in Wyoming. That's their stance on all of this. And you and I have gone through a separate timeline, which is his cell phone dark spots, his transactions related to construction work, which they basically are notes from a day planner. Like, so essentially he has a day planner where he says he was doing construction work in different places. It's sometimes difficult to track, where exactly that was, but you get a general feel for the timeline. And there are multiple people that talk in the FBI interviews. And I say talk, but what I mean is talk to the FBI, we don't have audio of them, but they're giving interviews saying that Keys worked for us in this timeline. So that's where they developed this.
Okay.
That's where they developed the second timeline from.
And so my point is, in bringing up the couriers, is that if you were to just look without the information he gave us, if you just look at a guy that, he says, well, I flew into Illinois. Okay, so he says, I visited my mom, I visited my property, I visited my brothers, then I went back and I left, right? From Chicago to San Francisco. Okay, that is not a trip that automatically encompasses Vermont, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's what I was thinking about this morning, because the Wyoming thing has always bothered me. I probably will have to go back and listen. So I have taken all those things. So I have, and we should talk about it when we're not recording, if you'll remind me, but I have where I've redone the timeline, I guess. And so I've taken off all the stuff that was confusing me. That is the kind of thing I've tried to apply to this whole Wyoming fiasco or whatever it is, because they seem to be pretty sure that he has a kill kit. And I think the reason we know about it is because they were in a way trying to bait him into telling them where it was.
Right.
Okay.
I almost think it was one of those things where where do you have kill kits? Because there were a couple moments like that, and I think basically they were naming off things, and he was affirming or denying. He was admitting that there was one in Washington State, and then admitting that there was possibly a cache in Wyoming.
Right. Okay.
With no other information.
Okay. And so it could have just as easily just been in passing. But so considering, what we know, which is, the courier's murder in Vermont and the circumstances of the travel that we know took place at that point in time. And then based on some of the things we were looking into with that knowledge of, the whole Wyoming thing in the back of my mind, and then some of the people you came upon and I was looking into, I started trying to kind of see it through what is known, which is the couriers, and put it okay, how could this have happened? And so, there isn't going to be a straight line. The only reason we have a straight line to Essex, Vermont is because he specifically said I was there. So it's interesting to me that came up, and based on some of the people we were looking at for Wyoming, I was like, man, there are all kinds of ways this could possibly work.
Yeah. And so here's what was so interesting about Wyoming to me. They're not the friendliest state open records wise. They're not the most closed off either. It is complicated to sort of get through and get some accurate records. But this is the most interesting thing I found, because I've looked at lots of missing persons records. I've looked at lots of police records. And when I say missing persons records, some of them are open and nameless, and some of them are concluded in some ways. And what I did was I took sort of an overarching look at Wyoming, and I went, all right, well, I know that Keyes was not in Wyoming before 1999 in any meaningful way. So I took 1999. I was like, okay, he's dead in 2012. I ran nameless records for 1999 to 2012. Now, overall, 1999 to 2012, you'll find about 6,615 missing persons. So that's a lot of missing people in this timeline. But in Wyoming, during the same time, there's only 16. And even closed missing persons cases in Wyoming, that number triples, but it only goes to about 50 people. So that's 50 people missing in Wyoming, found or not found.
And so when you say a closed case, I guess it would
that means, so a closed case is, okay, NamUs doesn't have closed cases in it. So when I say there's only 16 cases in Wyoming that are in NamUs, that's from 1999 to 2012. It doesn't mean that only 16 people went missing. There's 16 people that, as far as Wyoming law enforcement is concerned, and NamUs, they have entered 16 open cases into NamUs that are open and unresolved for the most part. Like, they don't know what happened. But when it was 40, the number was 49 when I started. That 49 minus the 16 means that there are 33 cases that I took a look at where a body had been found or a missing person had been found safe. So what I didn't count was one-day missings. There are a lot of those in Wyoming. If you go through police reports in the state of Wyoming, and you go from, and for that I was even a little lazier. I think I started at 2000 and I stopped at 2011. Because on the FBI's side, they say that Keyes was in Wyoming in September 2007, July 2008, and September 2011, per their knowledge. So I wasn't really looking at, like, if it was a runaway. I ran down 100 juvenile runaways in Wyoming. 99 of them were found safe. One of them I'm not sure about, but she's not in my 16 because she's not in NamUs. So I don't know what happened to her, but she didn't fall into those 3 dates. So I didn't look super hard at her.
I don't know. So my experience is, and I've only learned this through the research I've done on the show, but when people are reported missing officially and it ends up, for whatever reason, like they weren't missing, they can scrub the fact that they were missing off of the internet better than I've seen anybody scrub anything off the internet. It's wild. Isn't it? How do they do that?
I am not 100% sure how that happens, but I track down cases all the time where it takes me hours to get a really disappointing ending.
Well, it's not that disappointing. They're alive.
No, I'm saying as far as the disappointment comes from having researched something. I sent you one the other day that was like a traveling person. I'm not naming them here, but I looked for him through 8 months worth of newspapers, police reports, and incident reports. I found incident reports and police reports related to him in 6 states. And ultimately, after all of that time, 2 months after the break, meaning, so I was looking from, say January through August. In late September, early October, what I found that wrapped the case up for me was a 5150 order where he had been committed. So
Yeah.
all the time he's missing, there's flyers everywhere. Like there's all these articles where he's mentioned. His photo is everywhere. His family's on the news talking about him. And there's this whole story going on. And it turns out that he just went on a mental health adventure.
Right. Those cases, they are a waste of time for our prerogative, but
I don't mention them here, but the only reason I know where that kid turned out is because someone mentions the 5150 and that he's been found. I was like, that can't be real. So I went looking for it, found it, sent it to you. And I was like, these people, because I find these people, you know.
Right. I actually the very first thing I do when I find somebody is they just go off of anything I'm looking into, because it's not that I don't care. It's just it's none of my business. But I just find it fascinating that like you could put a picture of you partying on the internet and it could trail you your entire life, and all your future bosses will see it forever and ever. You can't get it off. But
a missing persons flyer goes poof.
It's unbelievable. I am in awe of, I don't care that they're gone. I'm just surprised at how well it's done.
Well, so, it's interesting when you get so there's other types of missing persons cases that are closed where this 16 becomes a lower number. And you're right. Like it is fascinating to see how quickly people can pull things from the internet. But you have to remember, like up until about 2010, it was not as widespread as it is today. There are people today that are missing that may be found. I don't think they'll ever be able to pull their stories down. And we've covered some of them along the way in like the last year or two. One of my sideline fascinations is with the true crime community. Man. I like to see how they operate and how they come together and how they fall apart.
Is it ever?
And
that's a new kind of thing for me, but I see the intrigue.
If there were Facebook groups back in 2004, like a lot of these people, there would be a footprint. There would be a much more interesting footprint.
Well, and that's why I think, and like now when people go missing, it's so much different because way less people go missing, or the turnover time is so much faster.
It really is. And I went looking for like that. You bring up an interesting thing there. One of my problems with the Keys cases was I think some of the bodies have been found, or pieces of the bodies. And this is something you and I struggle with because it can't be a case where guy goes missing and like there's one that was on the list for today, and I don't know if you noticed, but I took it completely off the list because he was only really missing for 20 days. He was found fully clothed, and this is the older gentleman. I really can't see, like he doesn't fit in any of the Keys type timelines even remotely. In fact, like there's another similar case where they say that Keys is here and cell phone records put him here. So I looked at his case, and because he was only missing for 20 days, I was like, I don't think that's going to be a found body. I don't think that's going to be anything related to Keys. And, I whittle these people down where I remove some things, and then later I really regret it. I'm like, should I have taken that person off? Should I not?
That's what keeps me like paralyzed. I'm so hyper vigilant about wanting to not put families through crap or whatever.
Well, and the other thing is we find a lot of suicides. And
in my opinion, we do. And so I'm not going to talk. Usually I'm not going to talk about suicide, especially if nobody has said it's a suicide.
Right. And, even some of the ones we have on like the list for today, while they're missing, ultimately it's known what happened to them. Like,
and
either adverse conditions. You said something the other night that was like really interesting to me. And I don't know if you remember how you phrased it, but you said
that grown men who go missing have succumbed to the fate that they brought upon themselves or something like that. Yeah. I don't know if you want to quote it. I think it's on our messages. But my point was that it's unlikely grown men, and I would say it would apply to a lot of women as well. And so I'm not trying, it's not really a biased gender thing. It's just most grown men and a lot of grown women who are missing, they have chosen either directly or through omission to be wherever they end up being. Right.
Right.
And so, that's kind of it's a very direct statement, but if you think about it, it's really true. People who walk out into the wilderness and succumb to the elements, I mean, we'll call it misadventure, but they essentially committed suicide, they killed themselves. They didn't commit suicide, but those aren't the kind of cases, which we've talked about this before, the misadventures and the dumb decision making or whatever. That's not really what we're interested in. It's people who have succumbed to fate that they didn't bring upon themselves.
Yeah. So we're looking for somebody who had an opportunity to meet a serial killer. It's kind of a weird circumstance to try and put your head into.
Man, is it ever.
And so I'm just going to kind of list off some of the people that we looked at, and then we're going to talk about a couple of them because you did some really good work on these guys. One of the common cases that comes up in Wyoming is this is really, this is a case for Do You Know Where Your Children Are? But this is the case of Justin Harris, and he was at a boys' home, and he went missing in February 15th of 2004. One, I wrote him off because there's a lot of theories about what happened to him, but I also feel like it's too early for Israel Keys to have been in Wyoming. I feel like the impetus for him to go to Wyoming, if it wasn't a random travel, would have been having a particular girlfriend who had a reason to be in Wyoming. Do you sort of agree with that?
I'm actually not entirely sure. I don't think he was. I don't think he has anything to do with Justin Harris, but I do think we're looking to put Wyoming in as a piece of the puzzle, just like we put Vermont in as a piece of the puzzle for the northeastern states. So
yeah, I agree with that.
And I think it's going to be a roundabout thing. But yeah, Justin Harris's case is very sad, but I don't see it being Key's situation.
Yeah. So Justin Harris's case may come up. We have another podcast where we're covering the children's cases separate, and that's called Do You Know Where the Children Are? You can find a link to it in our show notes here. We're not covering children's cases on the main feed unless it's a huge case or it's related to something that we're doing specifically. And since Justin doesn't seem to specifically be related, we're not covering him here. But later that same year, we have Renee Yeargain. And I was wondering what you thought of her. I noticed that other podcasts have covered her, and she's I have an opinion of her case. I don't know if you do.
I do, but you go ahead. I'd like to hear yours.
Okay, so the facts of Renee Yeargain's case are she went missing in August of 2004. Her boyfriend of 3 years was a guy named Josh, and Josh stated that she abandoned him and her 4 children. She took a grocery sack full of clothing, and she refused to say where she was going. After she vanished, Josh took the 3 oldest children to their former foster parents. They contacted the Wyoming Department of Family Services, but he kept the infant.
That was his child.
Yeah, so the infant was the only one that was his biological child. Her car, Renee's car, a 1987 station wagon, was found on August the 12th at a rest stop between Cheyenne and Torrington, Wyoming. Her keys and phone, her purse, her wallet, her checkbook were all inside of the car. Her cash was gone, and her tattoo kit that she had used was also missing. Her clothing was missing, like her little bag of clothing. The car had been parked at the rest area since the day that since the day that Josh said she went missing. She's never been heard from again. And her mom says that she has a history of leaving without warning, but had never been gone as long as she was this time. And she never would have voluntarily left this long without contacting her children. She'd been trying to get her life clean, and she had gotten a license to operate a tattoo business out of her home. And what she told her mother right before she went missing was that she was planning to marry Josh, which would have been in mid-August, mid to late August. So it was right after she went missing. There have been unidentified numbers that have called her phone over the years since she went missing. And the calls could not be traced. The caller was never identified. Her case remains open and unsolved. She was 5'8", 135 pounds. She had a host of different issues, I'll say. There were alcohol, there's mental health. 90% of cases involving missing people have mental health related to them in some way, shape, or fashion.
I would say that 95% of people on the planet have mental health issues having to do with their life. I'm just saying it's...
Yeah, I don't know what happened to Renee Yeargain. I think that it's probably related to Josh or the convexes to get away from Josh. I just don't know about the kids being abandoned like they were, if it wasn't.
Because her car, after it was found, they found that it had been there the entire time. It just sounds like a setup to me.
Yeah, and so I wrote her off. And also, she's in 2004. So in my opinion, I just sort of went, all right.
Now, I agree with you. And because she's in 2004, the weird thing is, so in my notes, I have her, I said, mom of 4, packed sack of clothes and left according to boyfriend, father of the youngest child. That's my note on it, okay? And from that case, to me, I thought it was in New York. So now it's weird because it's in Wyoming.
There's a similar case up in New York.
Oh, is there? Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'm not, maybe I haven't completely lost my mind.
Her name's not similar, but I think the boyfriends are the same name.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. But the whole thing, packed a sack of clothes and left, I think that it's more than likely a domestic situation, and it's a shame that it's not been resolved. It really should be. I feel like I feel like it should be resolved.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so some of the other cases that we did notes on sort of happened before this case. And I'm just going to say outright that I don't think Keys is involved in any of them, but some of them have me really curious. They go back, like I said, I was in the late 90s looking at these, and I have been through piles of newspaper articles, police reports, and I've tried to suss out things that even weren't in NamUs necessarily, but a lot of these are in NamUs. So you can find them and you can look up more information about these people. I sort of started with David Milton Crouch. And the only reason I started with him is because he is what you used to refer to as a Wally.
He is, absolutely. He's probably not Keys, but I have never heard of his story.
So David Milton Crouch is 27 years old. He went hiking with his friends in the Bridgerton wilderness. They got separated near Lake Island, which has an elevation of 10,500 feet. On paper, Crouch was last seen in Pinedale, Wyoming on August 31st of 1997. He was with 3 friends and a guide, and he separated from the group. He was headed on a solo fishing trip at Island Lake, which is this high elevation lake. The others went looking for him after he didn't return to the group's base camp by nightfall. Their base camp was at a place called Lost Lake. They reported him missing the next morning. Nighttime temperatures in the Island Lake area were well below freezing. Crouch didn't have many supplies with him. He didn't even have a coat or gloves. So authorities think that it's unlikely that he was even able to survive one night exposed to the elements. We got to remember, this is 1997, so this would be very early in Israel Keyes' timeline. So Crouch, he was married, 27 years old. He was an avid bicyclist. He lived in Stevensville, Maryland at the time of his disappearance. Searches for him had turned up no indication of his whereabouts. Even though he's presumed to have gotten lost or injured in the wilderness, they still haven't found any of the little things he took with him to go fishing either. My assumption is he is probably either in Island Lake or on the path between Island Lake and Lost Lake. He's just an interesting case because he's a Wally. He's truly lost in the wilderness.
Right. And so there's a discrepancy in the dates, and I couldn't, so this happened according to what we have is August 31st, but there was also like a September the 7th date, I think, but still 1997. But then in October, back home in Stevensville, Maryland, they actually published like his, I don't know if it was an obituary or just an in memorial of
A memorial, yeah.
And they say, so they accepted the fact that he hadn't made it because of the weather being so cold. But, so there was a discrepancy in the date, and I don't know what the resolution of that is, but I do know of the in memoriam says, August 31st. It's so weird that in such a short amount of time, he could have gotten lost forever, isn't it? It's really weird.
Well, so the way that I read it was, you have to look at the calendar. So if you look at August of 1997 on a calendar, this is what's interesting about it, his whole thing. Essentially, they go out there on Sunday. Their plan is to be there through the whole next week when these guys go out there, and they're fishing at different places. And what I think basically happened was they were like, he's fishing. And then the Rangers showed up because they did go down and report him missing the next day. I think the Rangers showed up and said he's out all night. And they were like, yeah, but it's August. And they were like, he went there because they were at different places. And I think they basically said, he's not going to make it. And I think everybody sort of panicked. There were some pretty extensive searches.
I think the search makes it weird that from point A to point B, they couldn't find him. But what if he decided he was going to go somewhere else or something like that, and they didn't know that?
Yeah, his case is one of those that you would end up calling endless possibilities. It doesn't seem like it at first, but it could be, what if one of the friends did something to him? What if a random stranger did something to him? The thing about his case is, I always felt like they should have found something about it.
That's what I'm saying. It's unbelievable that they haven't found anything.
Yeah, he is one of those that ends with the worst line that I can imagine, because it is horrible and it just means no conclusion ever. And that is, he is presumed to have gotten lost or injured in the wilderness.
Right. And they've actually, he's not even being, he's an open case on NamUs, but his family,
there's no way to look for him. They think he's dead, and there's no way to look for him.
Yeah, nobody's looking for him. He will be forever an unfound person. Yeah. Unless somebody stumbles across him.
There is a one-liner in here for Tracy Jensen. I don't know if you saw this one. There's nothing about this case. Tracy Jensen was last seen in the Fort Bridger Mountain View area, and then it's got a car description of a 1981 Subaru.
Right, I meant to actually take a look on a map and see which body of water he's in.
Yeah, that's another thing. We notice a lot of cases where usually one person, two unrelated people, sometimes couples, they can end up in a body of water after a long night out or a long drive. There's any number of reasons that people end up
pretty in much anybody in a vehicle.
They can go, and there's no warning to that either. That's the other thing. It's usually terrible that it's found. It's whatever it is, it's usually and completely unrelated.
It's amazing what can come out. But because he has nothing in his vehicle, and there wasn't really, you're right, there was nothing else about it. And I think I got some information, but it was just a normal day. He would have been on his way home or on his way to work, or he was just in normal life.
Probably a small body of water or a major body of water right there on his path.
Right. And he could probably be found, depending, of course, I guess I would say even when the path doesn't have a huge body of water, I would say that he could have gone somewhere else and ended up in the water. It's just really hard to hide a car.
Right. We have found them we have found where we'll look at it and go, oh, that's probably this. Like there was this one case we sort of followed 2 girls in a car, but that turned out to be they ran into the woods. They didn't even go into the water, but it was still the same idea. They just went deep into a thicket of woods.
Right. And so, and that could be, that's a little bit weirder, I guess, because
it's more unusual, I think, for a car not to be found.
Yeah, especially it was like they were going really fast and they propelled into the woods off the road, and the car was just there.
Yeah.
And somebody had seen it happen. But then when it was at night, and so when the first responders came out, they didn't see anything, so they were like, well, whatever. But so I feel like he's probably somewhere in the water.
Yeah. We have several of those that pop up throughout Wyoming. And Wyoming, it's not just water that people can find themselves in. There are all sorts of ways for people to sort of be written off as Wallies and lost in the wilderness that, it's weird because I don't really count the water bodies as lost in the wilderness per se, but I guess they're akin to them in some ways.
I see them as different.
Okay.
Because
Well, this guy, the next one is Clifford, Haux, Hawks or Haw. He was 42 years old. He went missing November 27th, 2003, but like more than likely what happened to him is he got lost in the desert. And there were searches for him. They were mainly, I got the feeling he was wanted for something minor, not anything like not any major thing, like maybe a possession charge or something, but that could be completely wrong. But for some reason, his family looked for him for a while, including his stepfather. His stepfather, until about 5 years later, I think actually wanted to find him. And his opinion was that he was lost in the desert. And Wyoming is such an interesting place. It can literally go from totally normal 90-degree day. You get to the right elevation, it's below freezing at night. But it has desert. It has like what looks like tundra. It has these rocky areas. Essentially, that's where Clifford went. So he's a little bit different than a water body.
He's actually, I think he, along with some of the other people that reviewed going through Wyoming, he's why I said what I said about, like, regardless of where he ended up, I feel like he ended up there on his own. Like, however it happened, I don't feel like anybody did anything to him.
Right. And so then we get into, like, one that I had trouble tracking is this guy, Bruce Parker Pike. Now, he's one that shows up on the Federal Registry for Missing in National Parks as missing on August the 2nd of 2006. And so this is a, standard midlife 47-year-old white male. He's 5'11", 185 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. And essentially, he goes missing at Indian Creek Campground, which is in Yellowstone National Park, on August 2nd of 2006. His vehicle is found abandoned inside the park, and there's nothing else about him. When I say there's nothing else, like, that's the record. He pops, and that is exactly what you see on the National Parks Registry as far as missing in national parks go. He's interesting to me. There's absolutely no way for me to track this guy down and say keys, not keys. It's a little early, I think. But so, and this is why I say it's a little early. In my opinion, Keys is doing things in threes, sort of. And you can sort of track this in Vermont. The way I picture it is, if the FBI thinks he was there in 2007, he's scoping the place out. Maybe he did something, maybe he didn't. He plants a kill kit. And they think he came back in 2008 or 2009. Well, okay, well, then he's using the kill kit. And then they think he might have been there at some point in 2011, late 2011. Well, he's cleaning up anything that's left there, maybe moving the kill kit. So that's my opinion of this. So when I say that Bruce Parker Pike's a little early, that doesn't mean I'm right. It just means that Keys would have been planning a kill kit in 2007. So he really didn't do anything in Wyoming until a little later on.
I can sort of get behind that. There's not really enough information about Bruce Parker Pike to attribute it to Keyes or not. But so he would be sort of and so this is what I would want to know. Like, is there information? Because he was from Texas, right? He was on vacation.
I believe so.
And so, was his plan to be at Indian Creek Campground at Yellowstone National Park? Like, that would be my question. Like, was he intending to be there? And so if the answer is yes, I would say that more than likely he has succumbed to his own fate, because I feel like if the answer is no, it could be different. But I don't know. Like you said, there's not much information, and I feel like he probably got lost.
Yeah, if he was intending to be in Yellowstone, I believe he got lost. I mean, I could see him being a Keyes victim, but more than likely what I see is, okay, sounds crazy, but if he's a Keyes victim, he's not in Yellowstone. That's just where the car was parked.
Right, and
his car is inside the park. To me, that says he's not a Keyes victim, because I don't think Keyes would do the check-in process and take the vehicle inside the park. I think he would leave it at the top parking, but I don't think he would take it inside. I could be totally wrong about that. But Texas has his case, and they're not looking for him in Yellowstone. So it's hard to get information about exactly where he was supposed to be.
Right. And so that's part of the problem in making an assessment. I would say, so would it be possible that Keyes could have taken somebody within the park?
Oh yeah, that's totally possible.
Okay.
His whole "that happens all the time" thing, like people going missing in the wilderness, this could be one of those cases.
Yeah, well, and so it would just depend, but I would say that if he did take this guy, he didn't take his car. Like, he came upon him in the wilderness, and he just never came back out. See, I just don't know. I feel like this guy's probably he just got lost.
There's another guy that's similar to this in Wyoming, Roy Vavra. He's January 2006. He said he was going hunting with a friend. The friend arrives. Roy's not home, but left a note saying that he would be back around 11 a.m. For those of you who don't hunt, you go very early. He was sighted a couple of miles away from his residence leaving a convenience store. But they marked that one up as him having been seen with an unknown white male in his mid-30s with short blonde hair who was driving a small white pickup truck. Everything that Roy had was left behind. So he's sort of like, so Bruce may be in Yellowstone. I don't know what happened to Roy. I think Roy and the unknown white male either made a new life or Roy succumbed to something else.
I think that, I don't think that, let's see, you said it was January 2006. So I don't think that Keyes would have looked mid-30s with short blonde hair at that point, but Keyes was really tall. And so I think that would be like one of the first descriptions that somebody would give of him. But I also don't think that he would have been walking with his victim in the convenience store. The
thing about this guy's case, so they have a picture of a truck that they put on all the missing persons flyers. There were some people looking for him. They had an approximate direction of travel. This guy was known to take some hunting and fishing trips and not really tell people where he had been. But in December 2009, a guy named Jason Dwayne Larson went to the police and said that Roy had been murdered and that his body was buried on a ranch near Gillette, Wyoming. Larson told the police that he and two other men had buried the body. And for some reason, they start digging into this story, and Larson says, "Oh, I made all that up." So he ends up being charged with, whatever, false reporting a crime to the police. That was a weird twist for me in this one.
I couldn't figure out why that guy did that.
Not only that, so there are false confessions made. Sometimes people are picked up and they're taken in to talk to the police about something. And they will, over time, confess to something they have not done. And sometimes people do go and say, "I did this crime, blah, blah, blah," voluntarily. This is a weird version of that because of the passage of time. This was more like a clearing of the conscience. But so when Roy went missing, last time his roommate saw him was January 24th of 2006. December 2009, you got this guy, Jason Larson, who goes in and confesses that his body is buried somewhere. That's a long time. And I think that Larson may have ended up, eating that reporting charge because the other dude told him, I'm going to take you out there and bury him with him.
Wouldn't they have looked? I thought maybe they had looked and he wasn't there and he was forced to recant it. I couldn't figure out, it didn't. So he's charged with this reporting charge. It doesn't, false reporting. And it's directly to do with him saying that he helped bury Roy's body. But they don't talk about, him being in the police custody for some reason that led to this.
No, he confessed.
Which is really weird. And like you said, I see where people are in custody or, I see that. I see where things happen. But to march yourself down there and confess, it's weird. And then I'm like, well, maybe he just wanted to go to jail.
I dug a little bit into him. There's not much there. He does have a criminal record. It's very minor.
It's
from
a
what I can
place
tell.
to live if you don't have any ambitions in life, I guess. I mean, they feed you and you have a bed to sleep in. So,
well, because of Jason Larson's confession and this whole hoax charge, and he wasn't from a local place, by the way. So this all happened in Wyoming, obviously, but Larson came from Iowa. He had been to Wyoming, but he had not lived there. He had been living in Chester, Iowa.
Wait, what? Who now?
Larson.
Oh, Larson.
Confessor.
Okay.
Yeah. Larson confesses to all of this. Made me wonder about this case at the end of it was he had to admit to the judge what he had done. So in the allocution of things, the Campbell County sheriffs admitted that Larson's story didn't seem credible to begin with. Larson told them he had lived in Gillette. He learned about the case by reading about it on the internet. And he ends up having to pay restitution for airfare and lodging for the Campbell County Sheriff's Office where he had gone and confessed. I don't know if this case is related to Larson or not. I just know that it's weird that this happened.
That is really weird.
Yeah.
I don't even know, man.
I didn't get a good feel for this, but it's still, like I said, it's still early in my timeline. I can't completely write it off for Keyes. I don't think Keyes was involved in what happened to
Yeah, I think if they could find the guy, the mid-30s short blonde hair guy driving a white truck similar to a Ford Courier, they would probably get some answers.
Yeah. So then there's another case. This is Charles Gustafson. He's actually from Minnesota. This is also 2006, by the way. Charles is an older gentleman. And when I say older, he's still active, but he's 72 years old at the time. He was last seen at approximately 6:55 a.m. on October the 11th, 2006. And he was in the Medicine Bow National Forest, which is 8 miles south of Arlington, Wyoming. He was seen at the junction of 111 and 129 in Carbon County. So this is hunting land. He was carrying a Winchester 30-06 with a green camouflage print stock and a blue metal barrel. He had a 3x9 scope on there. He also had a map, a GPS device, a compass, full load of shells. He had his lunch, he had his water, and he had a knife. He was not out there alone. He was elk hunting with family members, and they separated and went in different directions to basically set up for the day. He was supposed to return to camp that evening, but he never arrived. His relatives fired 3 shots in the air when they realized he was missing, which is sort of the international call sign for, hey, do you need help?
Or where are you?
Right. They said they heard 3 shots fired in return. However, they never located Gustafson, and there's been no indication of his whereabouts since then. He had gotten lost the day before, but a logger had found him. And temperatures that night on October the 11th, they got down into the 30s. The next few days it snowed. An extensive search of the area turned up no sign of Mr. Charles. He had been hunting in this area for 10 years prior to his disappearance. His family said that he was in excellent health. He was trained in wilderness survival when he was in the Air Force. So his case remains unsolved. This is late 2006. He's interesting to me, but I have a feeling that if he wasn't lost, he may have hurt himself with the third gunshot. I know that sounds crazy, but or the gunshots weren't him at all.
I was going to say, if that's the universal sign, anybody could have
responded back.
But that is the kind of thing, and I've never been elk hunting, much less elk hunting in Wyoming, but that kind of thing, it seems like the situation in the evening time where they've put their 3 shots off and then they get 3 shots in return. That would be like so difficult to deal with, knowing that, without considering anything else, because they're out there hunting and they expect him to be out there somewhere hunting and he's fine. Because you were so close to getting him back.
Well, they never find his gear.
That's so weird, isn't it?
And here's the other interesting part about this, and then I have a weird story about this. But so this guy's 5'7", 160 pounds. He had a brown hooded sweatshirt, a blaze orange vest, a camouflage print fanny pack, a blaze orange hat, and a watch on. And I was thinking they would have found some of those items even over the years. And his family, from what I can tell, some of his surviving family members still go out there and look a little bit, but it is pretty thick brush. So my brother and my father, they go hunting like this. Like they go off places sometimes. It's been a little while since they've done it, but the reason it's been a little while since they've done it is my dad is getting to be, he's not quite Charles's age, but he's getting up there. And so my dad, he and my brother went, I think it was elk hunting. It was some kind of large deer hunting. And they were staying in like this little cabin, it was like hunting land where you get a guide and you pay the guide X amount of money and you like sort of takes care of everything. They've done this to varying degrees of success several times. My dad more than my brother. My dad was doing this when I was a kid. So my dad goes in from a hunt, and he and my brother are getting ready to basically, sleep for the night. And he takes his rifle and he puts it in the corner of the room, and he's going through all the steps. Like, so you secure your weapons, like when you're on hunts like this and you're staying close to your weapon. And the way that you do that is you essentially unload it. Depending on if you have a bolt action or if you're using something automatically fed, there's different ways that you do that. But what my dad did was he forgot to clear the chamber. So he had unloaded the gun, but he had not cleared the bullet that was loaded to fire. And when he set the gun, set the rifle up against the wall near his bunk, it fired through the roof of the house. And I don't know how. I know you're familiar with smaller guns. I don't know if you're familiar with like rifles.
No,
I'm very familiar with rifles. So I wasn't there. I didn't see this happen. My brother can't tell a story with a straight face, and that like he wrinkles his brow like he's really worried that it happened, but he can't stop laughing about it. But rifles, I think my dad was carrying a similar rifle to what Charles Gustafson had, and
so that influences
so loud.
Oh yeah.
It's deafening.
So that is what influences your thought that he might have had an accident with it.
Yeah, so here's the thing about being in hunting. I don't hunt anymore. Like that was something I did when I was younger. As I've gotten older, I have one, serial killers that like hunters. 2, I don't like killing animals. Like it's not my thing. I would do it like end of the world situation, had to do it to survive. I would absolutely provide for my family that way. I have the skills to do it. I have hunted and killed things with my family. However, there's something about killing animals that it's overwhelming to me to do so. So I don't do it anymore. But carrying guns into the woods and having sat for hours and hours, and like, for people who don't hunt, here's how it used to go. My dad would get me up at 3 or 4 in the morning. We would drive hours somewhere to be, right there when the sun came up and it's cold because, hunting season runs from like bow season it would start in August, and then different types of guns can be used. Like there were muzzle loaders, which are the black powder guns, and then other guns can be used. You had a doe season, you had turkey season, squirrel season, but the bulk of the good hunting takes place in the cold. So it'd be a Saturday or Sunday morning or whatever, we were hunting, and we would sit in the woods dressed ridiculously, hopefully to keep us warm, usually just to make us smelly. And we would either sit in a tree stand or a blind. And throughout the day in the places that we hunted, because some of the places we hunted were public gaming lands and some of them were private gaming lands that, like, my father had a lease on with some of his buddies, where they just would lease acres and acres and acres for the purpose of like deer hunting. When you're sitting there all day, you hear gunshots go off. But the thing about hunting is you don't think about that being, oh, there's a dead person.
Right.
Like you don't. It's somebody shot a bird, somebody shot a deer, somebody whatever you're hunting for. The thought is possibly someone in your party who has, because you spread yourself out appropriately. With us, we did it by miles. My dad would drop me, and my brother, and my brother and I would be on opposite sides of my dad, but we would be like half a mile to a mile away from my dad, and he would tell us, you point that way, that is where you're looking. If you shoot anywhere else, you have to make sure that you make a clear shot. Like there's rules to it all. And that's, one of the things I did like doing was bow hunting because it was harder to hurt people with a bow and arrow by accident. Guns, I could totally see Charles Gustafson being a gun accident.
Right. And maybe not even by his own hand.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, people wear these blaze orange colors out there, and he seems to have been reported to have been dressed appropriately. But if he got misoriented and got a little lost, he could have crossed the tube with somebody. He could have crossed the barrel of someone's gun without even realizing it and gotten shot by someone who thought that his brown sweatshirt coming through was a deer.
Right. And so I put all that stuff he had with him like in the notes because I was like, okay, that's crazy that he had all this stuff with him but then I thought about something, and it seems like if somebody had shot him, they would have went to look for their kill, like thinking it was an animal, and found him. But
more than likely Charles is out there.
Well, and here's the other thing though. He's got all that stuff on him, but then it talks about how like right after he didn't come back to camp and he was missing, that the temperature fell, and that then it started snowing, right? And so it would actually make sense that he hid himself trying to stay warm.
Yep. And he might have just made a little shelter.
And that's probably what's hindering, because he has survival skills, right? According to his wife, that he had been in the Air Force and like he had learned certain wilderness survival things that, the average person wouldn't have. But I've always said, like, people who go missing in the wilderness, like, they typically don't hide their body, right? I mean, if you're hurt or whatever, you typically, you're found somewhere in the vicinity of where they thought you were. But in an effort to stay warm, I could see where he ended up hidden, and all that stuff's probably just sitting right there with him.
Well, he would have stowed it. He would he's not gonna be constantly carrying that. The idea is you carry your stuff in, and then you situate yourself. Particularly, I'm assuming he's at ground level. He's 72 years old. I don't really see him climbing a tree.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that he would stow his stuff, so that he could try and stay warm, and also to protect his gear, because you want to be able to use your gear again. So Charles, I've sort of written off. He's probably somewhere out in the woods. Now, There's a couple of other cases where this is like one of my pet peeves with NamUs. Some of the missing persons cases that end up in NamUs are a law enforcement attempt to apprehend a wanted fugitive. And that's very frustrating to me.
That's Wesley Niebucker.
Yeah, Wesley and Catherine are both there because of law enforcement. Catherine Majors in there.
Yeah, but they were, let's see.
Yeah, she was definitely wanted. And Wesley was also wanted.
But I thought that they had decided, yeah, I thought Catherine's case was very, very interesting.
Well, talk to me about Catherine's case. I do want to hear your conclusion on that.
Well, and it's interesting, but not necessarily, it doesn't apply necessarily here. But so this is what happened. So 53-year-old Catherine Major, she was last seen at the Four Seasons Resort in Teton Village, Wyoming on September 19th, 2009. She had been caught on video stealing over $700 worth of items from a spa cabinet, and the staff of the hotel called the police. Catherine admitted to the theft and agreed to pay for the items and then leave the hotel. So the hotel decided not to press charges against her. She went to her hotel room to get her belongings, and when a police officer went to check on her 40 minutes later, she was gone. The glass door to the outside was open. The safe in the room was ajar, and all of Major's belongings were left behind, including her wallet, purse, toiletries, $45,000 in cash, and 2 cats. There was no evidence of a struggle. Major had left a note on the counter addressed to her mother reading, "Please take care of my cats. I have nothing." Major's white Jaguar convertible was left in the Four Seasons parking garage. Based on some of the items found in Catherine's room, police think she may have been suffering from a bout of her bipolar disorder. They found pill bottles, hospital syringes, wigs, gloves, rope, 2 cellular phones, a book with the middle section cut out, a tape recorder, among other things. Dogs tracked Catherine's scent through the glass door of her room, across Granite Loop Road, north towards Obsidian Drive, down a hill towards Garnet Drive, and north towards a barn and open fields before they lost the trail. Investigators and Catherine's family believe that she's more than likely dead, and her case remains unsolved. So what I found so interesting about this, I agree, I think she was very much having some sort of mental health problem. But this is somebody that Keyes would have done a backflip for. $45,000 in cash. She had.
But then he doesn't take it?
Yeah, I'm saying I don't think she's Keyes' victim. I think she ran off. But I'm saying, if Keyes had known about this woman, he absolutely, that she would have been his dream victim because of all. She had a white Jaguar. Yeah. And $45,000 in cash in her hotel room. Okay, he never scored $45,000 in cash from anything, ever.
It's not so far away from Rock Springs and Green River that it's not interesting to me. But I don't think he would have left any of that.
No, of course not. No, he wouldn't have left that. That's what I'm saying. I'm sure it's not him because. He would have loved it if that had been her. I don't feel like she succumbed to foul play. She's one of the, grown people who succumb to her own decisions.
Well, I think that decision was she took the gun that she had cut into her book and she went out into the woods and thought she was either going to protect herself or kill herself. And I don't know which she ended up. She could have still died of succumbing to the elements, but ultimately, I think she killed herself.
It's a really, it's sad that I feel like this was a situation where what's happening.
It would have passed.
It would have passed, absolutely. And the fact that she was alone and she was feeling pressure, I assume she had nowhere to go. And She had $45,000 in cash though, so she could have gone to another hotel. But I feel like if she had some support, she wouldn't have gone and committed suicide. And I think I read, I didn't put it in the notes, but I believe she had tried to commit suicide like 5 times previously.
Yeah, it's all written off as like basically her mental health issue is written off as the reason for her disappearance. I have never completely discounted her for keys. The thing about her for any killer is why is all that stuff left behind? Not saying that they would take the cats.
No, but the $45,000 in cash, unless she had like $245,000 in cash in her room, and like that was just what was left. But I
hadn't thought of that, but that's a good
That's
point.
The only thing I could see happening. But no, she got in trouble. She couldn't handle herself, the situation, and she ran away from it. That's what happened. But her case is just fascinating to me because of like, what does she think was happening there? Like, she's on like a secret spy mission or something. It's just it's crazy. But it's the most entertaining thing I've ever seen written in the account of like what somebody left behind.
Oh, absolutely. Her case in her life, if we dug into it, it probably would make its own like limited series podcast. Seriously. Probably. From what I can find about her, the problem is it's tough to track down that information. And this was 2009 that this happened. So.
Right. And then I don't want to like put anything on someone who's having a mental breakdown. I don't want to turn it into something it's not or shine it in a bad light. Like, I don't want to be like, oh, she was killed by a serial killer, because clearly she wasn't, but it is like, I feel like it's worth mentioning because this type of situation could be prevented with the proper support.
And I'm not blowing her case off, but until we have more information, I don't know where to look for her. It's somewhere. She probably is not far from the Four Seasons in Wyoming.
She's north of Garnet Drive, past.
Okay.
Well, I'm just reading like how she went. Where they tracked her, they just need to go further. I cannot stress this enough.
Search and rescue. You're not going far enough. Jesus Christ.
I mean, I'm serious because like, however far you think that they could have gotten, you need to like triple it. Yeah. And I understand that. I mean, this woman, from all accounts and from the evidence, she left on her own. So I don't expect search and rescue to go after her. And because I don't feel like it's, I feel like if you get yourself into a predicament and then you're out there and you died, I mean, you got yourself into that. We shouldn't be risking, the safety of search and rescue or, wasting resources on people who willingly leave their hotel rooms and end up in the wilderness.
Well, she had been caught, which makes no sense because she had $45,000.
Why did she?
Maybe $245,000 or maybe some other amount.
Well, and money. So that I would buy. It's just the timing of being caught, the 40 minutes that passed, because they basically said, if you pay us and then leave, we will not press charges against you. She left her car, her cats, her money, like everything behind. And, so why run somewhere when you could drive? I'm just saying it's a strange situation. And I don't think the window of time where the police said, okay, you've got an hour to get your crap or 30 minutes to get your stuff or whatever they said. And then she didn't make the time and they went to look for her and she was gone. I mean, it's virtually impossible that somebody would have had the luck to come upon her and they would not have left that money behind.
Yeah, that's where I sort of end with her as well. There's a couple of other ones. Okay, so we can't cover the one that led you to the grizzly bear. I know what happened there. You said something yesterday, and I went back down that path, and I had been.
Did he in South Carolina?
Not currently, but yeah, Georgia currently. Sarah is the new name.
All right, I hear you, man.
So I'm not not even going to touch that. We had covered cases out here before, and I just want to highlight a couple of weird ones that I found. One of them was, so I found a lot of ranchers that go missing that kill themselves. Did you notice that there was a kind of a pattern of that out there?
Yeah, I told you that's why I came up with the whole thing. Like there nothing but like nobody did anything to those guys is the theme that kept going through my head. Yeah.
I think maybe Keys had a Utah transaction and that threw me off for a day or something.
Okay. Well, I think we should talk about the one before her.
Arlene?
Yeah.
All right. Tell me about Arlene, because I've read about her a couple of times. I don't understand her story, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, so according to the very little tiny bit of information that was available, and it comes from the Casper Star Tribune out of Casper, Wyoming, November 13th, 2002 is when the article is published. Sweetwater County authorities say the skeletal remains found this summer in southwest Wyoming belong to a Cheyenne woman missing since 2001. Sweetwater County Sheriff Gary Bailiff and County Coroner Dale Mahanovich said in a joint statement, the body has been identified as that of Arlene Bell, 59, of Cheyenne. Bell has been missing since mid-summer of 2001. Bailiff said Bell's unclothed remains were found on the afternoon of August 12th, about 4 miles northeast of Granger, by an employee of a nearby gravel pit. The sheriff said the cause of death is still under investigation. Bailiff said the scene was processed and photographed by county investigators and Wyoming State Crime Lab officials. The remains were then subjected to anthropological and forensic examination. Sweetwater County authorities worked with Cheyenne police to follow up a fresh missing persons lead that Bailiff said led to Bell's missing persons case. He said previous x-rays taken of Bell were compared to the remains. The match was based on several distinctive skeletal features and by the presence and location of 2 distinctive orthopedic devices. Arlene Bell was an American Indian last seen by her family near I-80 in Cheyenne on July 18th, 2001. Bailiff said authorities are now working to trace Bell's movements from the time she went missing. He said given the approximately 300 miles between Cheyenne and Granger along I-80, investigators are focusing their efforts on I-80 and in Fremont County, where Bell had relatives. Anyone with information about Bell, particularly her movements since July 2001, are asked to contact Sweetwater County law enforcement. So I don't know what you saw about Arlene, but she's an unsolved case in Wyoming, and she went missing in July of 2001. Now, the reason that's interesting to me is because that's right after Keys got out of the Army.
So are we thinking that maybe this is like one of the early victims he picks up and moves locations on? Is that the idea?
The timing of it is what attracted, and the fact she was found naked. And then because there's so little information, I can make up the whole story in my head. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. But I thought, wow, her timing there is very. Now, we did talk about earlier how we feel like Wyoming more than likely happened later. But one thing to kind of keep in mind is I feel like before he moved to Alaska in 2007, this would have been in July of 2001, and Keys was getting out of the Army in 2001, right at the beginning of the summertime. And it just so happens that Arlene Bell went missing in Wyoming, and she was last seen July 18th. And he could have been anywhere, really. So we don't know, but she was found naked, and time had passed between when she was killed and when she was found. And it's just something to think about because we don't have a whole lot of information about her. And it's the timing is it's interesting. I don't know if you have come across anybody else that went missing like around the time he was getting out, and that, I mean, they may not have been found, but the fact, I would expect all of his victims to be found naked or wearing very little.
Yeah, I mean that's always been my assumption. I did not look super hard at her because, now that you say it though, that really does sort of fit.
I know, and that's why I was like, we have to do her because I don't know the circumstances, and with some more information, I might be able to either say more likely or less likely, but just the timing is just crazy. And there's no indication that it's just weird because of the amount of that she traveled, where she ended up being found. Like, it's just, I think we should definitely consider it. And like, she would be the found body because there is an article
with a picture.
And it's got a picture. And I can't remember, was Amy Joy Bechtel on his computer?
No. Kristen Smart is. What's the date she went missing?
She was last seen alive on July 18th, 2001. It's something to consider.
No, I'll definitely consider her.
She was found on August 12th, 2002. So see, there was quite a bit of time.
Well, she was found then, or she's identified later in November. That is interesting. I did not find a lot about her when I went hunting.
What made you put her name on the list? Is she an unsolved case in Wyoming, I assume?
I was looking for... So, all right. So I have this one case. I'm not mentioning it today. I'm not coming back to it. There was this guy that went missing out there, and I was just reading about his case. His wife had a really hard time. I looked at him for the found body because he was found eventually. And he was found in pieces. And
oh, you did? Oh, no. Okay.
I put him on the bottom, but I'm not covering him because ultimately that guy is an accident, I think. But I read for hours and hours like stuff that people had written about him on the internet. His case really bothered me. And Arlene sort of falls into that same area. I looked at her case, and I want to say somebody else mentioned it to me. I honestly don't know how I came across Arlene, but if you've seen the clippings that I've gone through, there's a lot in there. I've gone through so many that I don't always remember.
Right, and I actually clipped her, but I had to look through several. Actually, I don't even know for certain that that's the one you were talking about, but it's the one I'm talking about based on that name. So it struck me when I saw it, and because she was found, she's not a missing person. It seems like she was a missing person at some point in time before her body was found. They talk about how it led to her. And so there's information out there somewhere, but not readily available. This is from, 2001. So we're talking 20 years ago.
There's a little bit of information out there that I was able to put her together. So she I guess we'll just go ahead and say it. She reminds me of this other case in Wyoming, but so she's 2001. This case is 8 years later. That's Rosie. Because they are similar, don't you think that they even look a little bit alike?
So
how do we cover Rosie?
Well, I don't know. I was wondering why you skipped her, and then
I skipped her because Rosie to me is Key's victim in Wyoming for sure. And you and I, we looked at a lot of places. The reason I put her last on here for me, the reason I'm talking about her last is I believe that Rosie is the one victim out of this group that could be verified, because I think if they go through, and I haven't been able to get anywhere with this yet. I'm still trying it. If they go, there are 3 motels within a couple of blocks of Rosie's house. Let's just tell her story really quick.
Okay. So Rosella Rosie Lovell, 55 years old, was last seen at First Christian Church in Laramie, Wyoming, sometime in April of 2009. At one time, Rosie had lived across the street from the church, and she had become a member in 2003. Diagnosed with schizophrenia in the late 1970s, she was estranged from her family and known to be a loner. Her family had reached out to her on occasion over the years, but never really reconnected with her. Her younger brother Michael was notified on October 30th, 2012, that his sister was a match to a set of unidentified remains that had been discovered in 2010, just north of where Rosie lived. The unidentified body was discovered on September 9th, 2010, on Roger Canyon Road, about 8 miles north of town, a remote part of the Warren Livestock Ranch, 14 miles northeast of her home in Laramie. Authorities sought assistance from the public in efforts to identify the body, positing that the woman had died sometime between the previous fall or spring. Initially, there was never a connection between Rosie and the found body. Rosie had no family in the area and had never been reported missing. It was only after facial reconstruction of the unidentified remains was completed and the media released it publicly that Rosie was identified. So many people called naming her as a possible identity of the unidentified body that they were able to obtain her dental records and make the match. At the time of her memorial service, which I believe was November of 2012, I think. At the time of her memorial service in the winter of 2012, the cause and circumstances of her death had remained unknown at that point.
Yeah, so Rosie is close to a university. She's right there in Laramie.
And she worked at the university.
She worked there as a janitor. And so she goes missing. My theory is if they go over to this little Gaslight Motel, which is by the little river there.
Is that the name of it, really?
Yeah, Gaslight Motel. If they go to the Gaslight Motel and if they have their records, they can go back to when she went missing. Here's my problem with it all. She goes missing in April 2009, but no one reports her missing. She's just not seen at church again. So her timeline is wide open.
It is. And so I made a presumption, and my presumption was that more than likely Rosie was last seen at church on Easter Sunday, and that was April 12th
of
2009. And, we're talking about Laramie, Wyoming here, where she's found,
right,
and where she lived. But so I'm thinking to myself, that's really weird. And then I go further. And so I find where she was living. And then I, just like I think you did, I'm like, okay, and this is where her body was found. And the distance it's not that far, but it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, we don't know if she had a car. We don't know what happened to her apartment. There's so many things that should have happened. And her body's not found until Keyes is in custody. And it's not really identified till he's almost dead. It's close to his death.
He never would have heard about this, or he did hear about it, and it was a contributing factor.
I thought about that too. I wondered if somehow he knew, because it did make the papers, but it's right at the end of his life that it makes the news.
Right. And so I don't know. It probably,
these women all look alike. These older women, they even look similar to Lorraine Curry.
And she's 50, and Rosie was 55, and then
talk about Arlene's
how
age.
old was Arlene?
Arlene was
59.
60. Yes, she was turning 60. Yeah.
Okay, and so
he's killing his mom over and over.
Man, you're not kidding. Well, okay. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Rosie is, and I feel like I could be putting a little bit too much emphasis on it because of how frustrated I've been with the April victim, okay? April '09 victim, which is thought to be Deborah Feldman, according to the FBI. And then I'm like, okay, this could work. And it's going to work in a way that's not going to make sense.
I followed the same. I immediately did the same thing you did when I saw that.
It's insane. So from her apartment, if you look on a map, and if you go directly north, like a block, there's hotels.
Yeah.
And it's just, I can actually imagine, like when he's talking about what he did at in Vermont, on his way to taking the couriers, he could have done the exact same thing here. And with a little more time, I think I could probably even develop it even more. But where she was in relationship to those hotels, and then sort of where her body was found, and we don't have an exact location. It's just sort of a proximal distance between where we know she lived and where the general area of where she was found. It has keys written all over it.
So here's what can be done about this to start with. I don't know what the timeline is on Rosie. If they could develop the timeline more with regards to keys, that means they check, there's 3 local motels, there's a chain motel. If they check these 3 to 5 motels within walking distance of Rosie's house, they will probably find Key's name in there because he was using his real name. So he'll be in the register because this is a 2009 case. They should have like paper becoming digital records. He should be able, like someone should be able to find Key's name in the records locally here. So this would give us a case that we sort of knew around him what had been done, but we would have to go back through and find out from Rosie's neighbors at the time. And I've started pulling up their names and tracking them down. When the last time she was really seen was, we'd have to really look at the investigative files.
Well, and if we just find out when was the first time she didn't pay rent? Was it auto paid? Like that kind of thing? Because there was a whole process that had to have occurred here. She wasn't reported missing, but I mean, what did they think? She just left? Like that's really strange. And so, all this stuff could exist somewhere. It's just based on sort of what we have to go off of, which isn't a whole lot. This is a crazy case.
Yeah, so it's the weirdest thing. I ended up in this town, Laramie, for a different case where I was hunting down a ring. Do you remember this whole thing that I was telling you about? It's the same county.
I vaguely remember.
It's a 70s case. Like there's this girl that's missing that I think I've found her wedding ring. And so the girl goes missing from the East Coast. The wedding ring is in Wyoming. It's long, long time ago. But I have started a rapport with a cold case investigator there. I just feel like it's too early in my friendship with them to say, because it's a very small place. I don't think I'm to the point where I can say, hey, so can I see the investigative files of a 2009 murder? But I may just have to do that.
Yeah, I don't think that that's what you're going to have to ask. I don't think anybody thinks she's been murdered.
Can I see the investigative? You think she's a suicide? It's a long walk.
I know that.
Like it's like days. So if we can run down the timeline of Rosie, I am pretty sure that we will find out that Rosie is Key's victim from sometime after the Tupper Lake bank robbery. Right.
And it really, so in theory, we have no idea, like when she was initially, I say she probably went to church on Easter Sunday and they remembered that she was there. but we don't really know. And then, nobody missed her enough that they reported her missing. She was never a missing person.
No, she wasn't.
And it makes sense that this would be, so his plan, that we know about, like the way he talks through what he did with the couriers, right? So I see the exact same thing happening, except, this would be a year earlier because this would be sometime in 2009.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 2 years earlier. Yeah, you're right. 2 years earlier. But so I could see a progression. I could see where he would successfully do something with one person and then want to go for a couple.
Yeah. I think we really need to track down her vehicle. She is being mentioned today because we're doing, Summer of Keys, but she's going to be I am going to figure out how to dig into her case more. Rosie's case is one that, like, I really, like, when I looked at it, and I think maybe you had the same feeling, looked at it from overhead. It wasn't just the motel. It wasn't just the university. It was the highway proximity. There was a lot going on there that I just looked at.
And the national parks, too. Don't forget that.
I was like, this, yeah. You have the wildlife refuge and the national park were there I named like 10 things. You were like, what do you notice here?
Right.
Because I was at the beach and coming back, and I was so sunburned. I had to pull over because I had all the dogs with me, and my wife was driving separately because she was bringing things from her parents' house. So I pulled over, and when I pulled over, I guess you had sent me the address, so I went ahead and looked at it, and like immediately I was like, yep, those things all check off. So one of the reasons Arlene Bell stayed on here is I feel like Arlene and Rosie are similar in some ways. They're not in the same places, but they're similar. And the other thing about Arlene that was interesting, I don't know if you noticed this, but last week's episode, which will be this week's episode, recording was, I believe that Mark Reinberger's body is close to the gravel pit. And Arlene was found in a gravel pit. I don't know why I don't know if that could be a thing or not, because that's the guy whose phone and jacket were found in the gravel pit near the trailer during the standoff.
Oh, he wasn't found, though.
No, he hasn't been found yet.
Oh, I was confused.
I think he's by that gravel kit.
That is interesting. And I guess part of me also, I feel like these cases deserve more attention than they've gotten. And just in case these, 50-something-year-old women didn't go wander off. And I don't think Arlene Bell wandered off naked. And I mean, I don't feel like a woman committing suicide, it would be highly unlikely that they would get undressed. No. That's bothersome to me because it's like the ultimate indignity to then what happened to her? Like, what's the conclusion here? Because I've noticed a lot of these cases when people are found, especially if they haven't been missing or they've been missing, but it's not a big deal. Like, you don't really find the follow-up. Like, they never come back and say, oh, they've determined this, that, or the other. And so I'm left to speculate that it's unconcluded, not concluded. It never is concluded what happened.
Right.
And then, if you don't have somebody reported missing, you can rest assured there's nobody pushing for a possible foul play incident to be resolved. If nobody reported them missing, nobody cares enough to push that. And I'm not saying necessarily it has to be foul play. I just, I would like to know that it really was looked at.
Thank you for joining us for our Cruel Summer episodes, where we go back to looking at Israel Keys. We are sponsored by LabrottieCreations.com. You can check them out at LabrottieCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
right. I give it all just to have you tonight. When you say your love makes me come undone. Something perfectly wild, spinning around like a child. Oh, and all that you are good for my heart. Something rare, something strong, stands against all the odds. Love that blooms in the dark. You are good for my heart. Nothing compares to feeling at home. That look in your eyes, bringing peace to my soul. Something magnetic, wholesome and true. Of all the gifts I've been given, my favorite is you. When you say your love makes me come undone. Something perfectly wild, spinning around like a child. Oh, and all that you are good for my heart. Something rare, something strong, stands against all the odds. Love that blooms in the dark. You are good for my Something perfectly wild, spinning around like a child. Oh, and all that you are good for my heart. Something rare, something strong, stands against all the odds. Love that blooms in the dark. Something perfectly wild, spinning around like a child. Oh, and all that you are good for my heart. Something rare, something strong, stands against all the odds. Love that blooms in the dark. You are good. You are good for my heart.